Never play this game with your friends. Once there was a group of girls who heard about the game Baby Blue. They didn't believe in it but thought they could scare their friend Laura. So they sent Laura into a bathroom by herself. She turned off the lights, closed the door, and put her arms out as if to hold a baby. Then started chanting Baby Blue 13 times. What happened next cannot be explained. Laura felt a heavy weight in her arms. Then she felt the weight in her arms scratching her. She was terrified and didn't know what to do. She wanted to drop it, but she was afraid of what might happen if she did, so she froze, and the weight grew heavier and heavier. Suddenly, she saw a woman in the bathroom mirror with a twisted look on her face. She screamed in terror. When her friends heard her scream, they tried to open the door, but it was locked. When they finally opened the door, they found Laura on the floor. Her eyes had been scratched out. They tried to move her body, but they couldn't, because something large and invisible was pinning her to the ground. This is why when something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Once a newly married couple was searching for houses they could buy, and they came across a beautiful house with a suspiciously cheap price. They couldn't see anything wrong with the house, so they just thought they got lucky. They moved in quickly. But one day the husband was walking down the hallway when he found a red crayon on the floor. He thought maybe the previous residents had left it behind, so he just threw it out. The next day he found another red crayon lying in the exact same place. This time he asked his wife about it. His wife looked shocked. She confessed that every day since they've moved in, she's been finding red crayons in the hallway too. Then the husband tried to tap on the wall at the end of the hallway and heard a hollow sound. He began peeling off the wallpaper and found a sliding door behind it. It was as if someone had tried everything they could to keep anyone from finding this door. He tried to open it, but the door was nailed shut. Then he took a hammer and pried off the nails one by one. He opened the door to find a small room with words scribbled in red crayon all over the walls. It said, "Mommy, I'm sorry, let me out," over and over. This is why you should never answer a call from your own number. Tim was woken up by his phone constantly ringing, but he ignored it and went back to sleep. That day he went to work, pulled out his phone, and saw that he had a missed call from his own number. He thought this must be a coincidence. He went to hang out with his friend and another call came. This time he picked up and heard his own voice repeating whatever he'd say back to him, until he was about to hang up. The voice said, "You're going downhill." He felt very uneasy but tried to let it go. The next morning at work, his number called again, but this time he felt terrified. So he made up an excuse and drove home as fast as he could. He knew deep inside some kind of a confrontation was coming. As soon as he got home, he saw his car pull into the driveway, and he saw himself get out of the car with a terrifying smile on his face. His doppelganger had stalked him and found him. Tim barricaded himself in his bedroom, but his doppelganger was banging on the door. He knew he was almost out of time. That's when he had one last idea. He pulled out his phone and called himself, and he heard his own voice reply, "How are you calling me from this number? Who are you?" If you ever see a red car, don't do what he did. Once there was a man in Mexico who took a night shift at work. After work, as he was walking home, he saw a bright red car. The red car pulled up in front of him and 3 women were inside. They asked if he needed a ride home, and because he thought they were beautiful and harmless young women, he agreed. The next morning, his wife realized he never came back home. She called his work and they didn't know where he was either, so she called the police. The police then went to his workplace, which is where he was last seen, and began searching. A few miles away, they found his body. It was lying on the side of the road with strange symbols carved all over. The 3 women in the red car turned out to be witches who traveled the road looking for men, usually those who wander the streets late at night. When they found these men, they would entice them to get into their car with them, promise him they could fulfill all of his dreams, then begin their dark occult ritual where he would be sacrificed to the devil. But the most disturbing part of the story is that the bright red car that these witches were driving were painted from the blood of all of their victims. This is why you should be careful who you believe. Once there was a girl named Danny who lived with her parents, but one day she came home and found something terrifying. She went to the kitchen to get some water, but dropped the glass and screamed in terror. On the floor, she saw the body of her mother. Then her father burst into the room. He said, "Danny, listen carefully. Your mom was trying to run away and abandon us. We got in a fight. She fell. It was an accident. I'm so sorry." Danny was in shock, but nothing could have prepared her for what her father said next. "We had to get rid of the evidence ourselves. If the neighbors ask questions, just say she ran away with another man." Danny ran upstairs to her room in tears. That's when she found something strange. On her bed was a suitcase with all her clothes folded inside. On top of the suitcase was a note. It said, "Danny, I packed your things. We need to leave. Your father has gone insane." This is why you should never abandon your old toys. Once there was an old toy store, and on the top shelf in the back of this toy store was a doll. Every day this doll watched as people came into the store, but no one ever paid any attention to it, until one day its dreams came true. One girl named Lena came into the store and bought the doll, but things quickly took a terrifying turn. Although Lena liked the doll in the beginning, she quickly grew sick of it. Days and months passed and she ended up abandoning the doll like a piece of trash, until eventually Lena got into a fight with her mother when she said, "I never wanted the stupid doll anyways," but of course she could have never known the terrifying consequences this would lead to. One night as Lena slept in her bed, she heard a creaking noise. Then the noise moved closer and closer, until Lena's mother heard a scream coming from her bedroom. When she came in, she saw Lena on the ground, but it was how she looked that terrified her mother the most. Lena's arms and legs were bent in strange positions like a disjointed doll. Her mouth was sewn shut, but she looked desperately up at her mother, then to her desk, and on her desk was a note that said, "Now you know what it's like to be a doll." Have you ever eavesdropped on someone else's conversation? For one woman who is a psychiatrist, her eavesdropping on her neighbors would lead to something terrifying. So this woman moved into an apartment and noticed that there was a family of 3 living next to her. They were a married couple in their 60s and their son who was about 30. The son, however, barely left the house, and the psychiatrist would often hear the mother yelling and the couple arguing. Eventually, the son wouldn't leave the house for years, but one day everything changed. The father knocked on the psychiatrist's door looking devastated. He said his family needed her help, so she went with him to their apartment where their mother was waiting. Then the couple led her to their son's room, where the mother banged on the door and said, "We're coming in." The son was still in bed sleeping. Then the mother started yelling, "Are you going to sleep forever, you lazy good for nothing?" and grabbed a golf club and began beating the son sleeping beneath the covers. The psychiatrist was shocked and pulled the mother off of her son. But that was not nearly the most terrifying part. When the psychiatrist tried to check if the son was hurt, she pulled back the covers and saw a mummified corpse. Then the father said, "It's my wife who needs help. This has been going on for years and I can't take it anymore."
If you're alone right now, don't watch this video. In the winter of 2018, a man who was living alone in the mountains wakes up to find a red ball sitting on his front yard. He assumed the only neighbor he had must have kids, and so he kicks the ball over the fence, goes inside, doesn't think anything of it. That night, he wakes up to the sound of kids laughing outside of his window. He goes outside to check on them because it's the middle of the night, and there's no kids anywhere, but that red ball is back on his property. So he picks it up, brings it in his house, and goes back to bed. The next morning, he goes over to his neighbor's house to let them know that their kids were out in his yard in the middle of the night. But it turns out his neighbor is just some old man who lives alone, and there aren't any kids anywhere in the area. That night, he wakes up again to the sound of kids on his property, and when he looks outside, there's no kids, but that red ball is back on his property. Panicked, he runs downstairs to make sure the one he brought in is still inside, and it's gone. He checked every window and door and everything was still locked. It didn't make any sense. He decides to look out the window one more time, and off in the distance is some weird stiff figure watching him.
This is why you should always keep your phone charged. A girl named Marissa came home from school at around 3 p.m. She walked in the door and told her mom that some random number kept calling her all day. Her mom told her the person may have the wrong number and just to ignore it. Marissa said okay and begins to do her homework. A couple hours later, she receives a phone call from the same number. Marissa answers it this time and says, "Hello?" The man then says, "We finally found you. Don't worry, bunny." Marissa begins to panic and tells her mom what just happened. Her mom's face goes blank and says, "What did the man just call you?" Marissa says, "He called me bunny." Her mom yells and says, "Grab your stuff, we need to leave." Marissa, confused, packs her things and gets into the red car. Her mom begins driving fast and turns on the radio.
Only a genius could solve this murder mystery first try. It was Tuesday, the 14th of March, and Jess was at her mother's funeral. At the service, she met a young, attractive man she had never seen before. They had a few conversations and started to get to know each other, until Jess had to go and see her family at the other side of the room. She never got the chance to get his name or phone number before he left. She contacted everybody that went to the funeral, but nobody seemed to know who this mystery man was. A month later, Jess's sister was found dead in her apartment. Due to the cause of death, the police suspected this was a murder. But who killed her sister? Let me know in the comments if you can solve this murder mystery, and if you can, send it to a friend to see if they can too. Let's see if you can solve this riddle without looking in the comments. A man was found unconscious in front of a store at 2 o'clock in the morning. His head was bleeding, and there was a brick.
Have you ever seen a painting that looked extremely realistic? Jake was waiting for his mom when he saw a strangely realistic painting, but he made one mistake that would lead to terrifying consequences. During his mom's doctor's appointment, Jake was sitting alone in the hospital waiting room. That's when he saw the painting. It looked so real, almost like a photo. He was promised ice cream if he sat quietly, but he found himself growing more and more curious. He felt like he needed to move closer to the painting, so he got up and walked towards it. The painting was of an old man, but there was something wrong with it. It seemed like the eyes would follow Jake no matter where he he'd walk, but soon something even more unbelievable would happen, something no one can explain. The painting, needless to say, made Jake feel creeped out, but he tried not to feel so scared. It was a painting after all. Then Jake leaned in and saw one weird detail. The old man had unusually long fingers and fingernails. A bit later, Jake's mom came out of the doctor's office, but Jake was nowhere to be found. She called him but got no reply. Then she turned around and saw a very realistic painting on the wall. The boy in the painting looked oddly familiar. Never play this game with your friends. Once there was a group of girls who heard about the game Baby Blue. They didn't believe in it but thought they could scare. Turned around and saw a very realistic painting on the wall. The boy in the painting looked oddly familiar. Never play this game with your friends. Once there was a group of girls who heard about the game Baby Blue. They didn't believe.
This is why you should never leave your house unlocked. Part 1. When I was about 12 years old, I lived in Kansas. Both my parents were out and I was home alone with my 2 dogs. I was sitting in my bedroom playing on my computer when I heard the very distinct sound of the front door open and close, like someone had just come in. My dogs got up and ran into the living room, and so I just assumed my parents were home. I shouted for my mum to confirm this and heard no response. I paused my game and walked out into the living room to see, and as I did, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I had heard someone come in, clear as day, but no one was there. I wasn't wearing headphones and I'd had the computer volume turned down, so I knew it couldn't have been the game. I tried calling my parents, but neither of them picked up, so for the first time in my life, I called the police. This is why you should never leave your house unlocked. Part 2. I explained the situation to the 911 operator and she told me that police were on their way. I stood there rooted to the spot and not long after my parents got home. The police arrived shortly after and told us that thieves usually wait until homeowners leave, check the door, and if it's unlocked they go in and take valuables. They checked the house but found no one. They said whoever it was probably left when they heard that someone was home. They told us to make sure that we lock the doors but not to worry too much. Not long after it happened, I told the story to one of my friends, and he said, "You only heard the door once. That means they were most likely already in the house. You just heard them leave." This is why you should never try using a Ouija board. My friends and I decided to play with a Ouija board after work in our office and spoke to a girl named Quinn. She didn't say much but seemed friendly enough, but when I mentioned my girlfriend, she got super mad and protective of me. When it got to 2 a.m, we said goodbye to her, but about a week later, in the middle of the night, the office block that we worked in burnt down. It creeped us all out, so a week later we used the Ouija board again near a lake and asked for Quinn. When we got through to her, we asked if she started the fire, to which she responded, yes. About 2 weeks later, I was driving to my girlfriend's house with the board in the back of the truck. I didn't know it at the time, but my girlfriend was in fact cheating on me. But I guess Quinn knew because I lost control of the truck and flipped it upside down. When the cops arrived to make sure I